Hey everybody, we're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
Dr. Kristen.
You are very welcome to our YouTube channel today. We are two social scientists with PhDs who love having conversations about popular and lived culture. We are educators who focus on empathy and inclusivity by having these conversations about a whole host of things, from systemic racism to romance tropes in Netflix's astronomically successful Bridgerton, and all the things that fall in between, including today's topic of male violence against women. We love having conversations with each other, as you will see from this upcoming video. It's going to be a doozy, but we also love to talk to you guys about these issues. So do all the YouTubey things, like and subscribe and share and comment below, and we would love to engage with you.
This is a piece of a series we call hot-ish takes. Unlike other outlets that really, really love hot takes, we love the ish because sometimes we need to marinate in our ideas. We like to do research. We need to talk some things out. We process at different speeds. And part of our kind of commitment to you guys as subscribers and viewers is that we're not going to come in here kind of half-cocked without the right details or information, especially in cases like today's, which is constantly evolving. We're sitting here on the afternoon of March the 16th. And we're going to be talking about Sarah Everard, who was murdered in Belfast. Everything in my heart is Belfast. She was murdered in Clapham Green in London. Her body was on March the 3rd. Ostensibly, she disappeared that night. Then her body was discovered about 2 weeks later, almost 10 days later, in the area of England called Kent, which is where like half of the Jane Austen novels take place, and is about 2 hours southeast of London. As of this moment, a Metropolitan Police officer has been charged with her abduction and murder. Another Metropolitan Police officer who was part of the investigation has been removed from the case and I think even put on leave for exchanging inappropriate memes on social media. There was a vigil on Saturday night that had been scheduled and then was canceled because of COVID regulations, to which the police showed up in Clapham Common and used some physical force to remove the women who were offering a vigil for Sarah. And the effects of that behavior and decision are ongoing. The emotions around that night are ongoing. And so we're not going to comment on that in particular. What we would like to do is step back into the cultural implications of the narrative around Sarah's death, Sarah's violent, inappropriate death. We obviously did not know Sarah. We send there's not words in the English language for how we can imagine her friends and family must be feeling right now. We feel it would be rude and inappropriate to even try to speculate. And so we simply offer our grief for them and a commitment that on her behalf, we will not allow the world to blame her for her own death. We will be voices of dissent in that way. So all of that to say, we've got a couple topics we want to talk about. I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Erin now because she's been thinking a lot about language and how we talk about this issue that I think is a really important thing for us to consider.
Yeah, and I think I'll start from admitting my own mea culpa in this, because when I went to make the Trello card for this hot-ish take, as we were talking about doing it in the start of this week, I titled the video "Violence Against Women, Misogyny, and the Case of Sarah Everard." And as I was watching events unfold over the weekend, I came across a quote from Jackson Katz, who is a PhD and does a lot of work with domestic violence training and sexual violence training, specifically speaking about toxic masculinity and misogyny. And this quote was from his TED Talk called "Violence Against Women, It's a Men's Issue." Link below. Please watch it. It's fantastic, 20 minutes of your time. But Jackson's point was that the phrase "violence against women," which is most often used, is a passive phrase. It has taken the actor out of that sentence. Who is committing the violence against women? We don't know. It is a non-entity. And that puts the onus on women and makes it sound like a women's issue. And so hence I changed our title to Male Violence Against Women, because that is what we are talking about. Now, yes, obviously women commit violence against women, men commit violence against men. We are not making
women commit violence against men and children, but we are specifically,
there is not a gender binary, and we know this, so there exists a whole spectrum, but we are specifically talking about the case of Sarah Everard and the epidemic of violence against women. But for me, just thinking about the way our language has evolved, and Jackson talks about it as like a cognitive behavior that we have taken men out of the sentence. And what that does is it makes us ask questions of the women, because they're the only person, they're the only object in a sentence that, let's use the example he uses in his TED Talk. So if you have a sentence, John beat Mary, we know who did it, who did what to whom. John beat Mary. But as our language evolved around this topic, we went to Mary was beaten by John. Still the same information, a little bit different, problematic, not putting the action on John directly. And then you get the next evolution of that, where John is taken out of the sentence completely. Mary was beaten. Mary was battered is now the term we use. Mary is a battered woman. And by the time we get to that last sentence, we've removed the actor, the perpetrator, from that sentence. And so then the questions become, where was Mary when this happened? Why did she talk to that man? Why did she get in the taxi? What was she wearing? How much did she have to drink? What were her friends doing? Why was she walking home alone? All our questions become about the women and focused on their actions, as opposed to the men involved in this scenario and their actions. And that's immediately what we saw happen with Sarah Everard. She was walking home at night alone in London, 9:30 at night. She did everything women are supposed to do and told that we have to do to maintain our own safety in public spaces. She was dressed in reflective gear so that she would be seen by cars. She was not dressed provocatively, whatever that means. She hadn't been drinking. It was 9:30 at night. It wasn't 2 a.m. She walked on a well-lit, busy street. She called her boyfriend on her way home to let somebody know that she was coming home and to maybe stave off a violent attack by being on the phone with somebody else. So all of these behaviors that women have been trained to do, Sarah did all of them, and she was still abducted and she was still murdered. And so it's a huge, huge issue when we continue to use this passive voice and continue to only ask questions of women, because then it becomes somehow our fault that we keep doing this. And it's a huge, huge problem with language that we have to be more conscious of, and we have to talk about more, because it has a long history of gendered perceptions, and that's one of the things Dr. Kristen wants to talk about.
One of the things when we talk about women is that for a long time in a lot of societies, and still today, but I'm going to focus on the United States, for a long time in the United States, there was a lot of cultural assumptions about places that women should be and places that women shouldn't be, that there was spaces in which we were allowed and spaces in which we weren't. This prevails, but it's generally more looked down upon if you use the language that blatantly. It's a lot more insidious now. But women belong in the kitchen, like the really weird PR thing that Burger King did a couple weeks ago. Women don't belong in government. Women are supposed to raise children, like all those kind of things. We put a lot of stuff on women. Our shoulders are broad. We've carried a lot. But fundamentally, a lot of the underpinnings of those comments are that we want women to be obedient. We want women to be quiet, or if they are loud, we want them to be loud in service to whatever the power structure is. Mm-hmm. If women are to be bawdy, then they should never do it outside. Like they should never go too far. Like it's okay to make bawdy jokes about male anatomy. It's not okay to use words for female anatomy. There are a lot of rules that go around this. And Jessica Valenti, who's one of my personal favorite feminist theorists, sent out a newsletter yesterday that I think is really important. I'm going to read a little bit from it. And it says, "Following the rules won't save us." We'll link it below. But she says, so long as men do nothing to stop misogyny and rape culture, we are not safe. We are not safe on the streets. We are not safe with police. We are not safe on college campuses or in bars or at our jobs or in classrooms. We're not even safe in our own homes. Convincing women that we can protect ourselves by following an arbitrary set of rules doesn't stop us from getting assaulted or killed. What it does do, however, is ensure that we continue to be rule followers. One of the more insidious ways that we're asked to be obedient is diet culture, actually, because diet culture isn't really at all about health. Diet culture is about that women can follow rules and that we can stay fundamentally obedient to the perfect type of what women should look and behave like, according to the rest of our society, because actual pursuits of health very rarely have anything to do with diets. So it's all of that. Women are programmed to be incredibly concerned about public perception of us. We are programmed to be aware, by the way, all the time of everything happening all around us. But it took a long time in my life, I know, to imagine that it was anyone's fault but my own if I got assaulted. And when I did, I absolutely believed it was my fault. And I still struggle with that I did something I shouldn't have done, that I gave him a signal I shouldn't have said. I did all this stuff. And the true answer is that I have a vivid memory of saying no. That's all that matters. And so that's the difference too, when we talk about how do women engage in the world and how do men fight misogyny? Absolutely great question. What can men do? There have been some really wonderful, wonderful gentlemen on Instagram and Twitter and in both of our personal lives over the last couple of weeks that have asked this question to us. What can I do? There's lots of answers. My personal answer is to always seek consent for everything. In that, and don't get pedantic here. Don't like, there are some relationships that you're in where potentially every single second doesn't need to require consent. But there is a difference between buying a woman a drink and asking to buy a woman a drink. There is a difference between assuming I want to be walked home to asking if I'd like to be walked home. There is a difference in laughing at that joke and not laughing at that joke. There is a difference in who you give money to and how their advertisers use women's bodies and how they don't. So the idea at all times is to consider consent and to consider if a woman or anybody on the gender binary, anywhere, consider if a human being has consented to how they are being interacted with at this moment. It is work. We talk a lot here at Abbey Research about the work of inclusivity, and gender inclusivity is work. Dismantling misogyny and rape culture is work, because every culture on the planet, except for like 2 or 3 really rad tribes that have largely died out at this point, are misogynistic and are rape cultures. And that's just life. Rape culture, by the way, we've been throwing that around. If this is the first time you've joined us, rape culture is kind of a social science definition for any culture in which male is the default and male power is the defaulting generator of the culture. So because of that, male power is the generator of the culture. Anyone who does not fall into that power stream is therefore at risk. So that's just, rape culture does not mean that everyone is going to get raped or that everybody will rape. It simply means that rape is permissible. And what we have learned as you look at sexual assault statutes and you even look at the language that Dr. Hinson just so eloquently explained, rape is very permissible in the United States and in the United Kingdom, and in a lot of other places. But we specifically know both of those places because we've lived there.
And I think the final point that I want to make about this is about this idea of permissibility and this question of what can men do? What can anyone on any gender binary or on any gender spectrum do in these scenarios? And going back to Jackson Katz for a moment in his TED Talk, which the link will be below, he talks about bystander intervention and bystander training and what it means to be a bystander. So that's a really important part, recognizing that you are always present in these scenarios and you can do something. But for me, watching the reaction of women of any age, of any experience from all over the world react to not only what happened to Sarah Everard, but then how she was talked about, how the Metropolitan Police tried to distance themselves from the man who was accused of her abduction and murder by saying he was not on duty at the time, as if that stopped him from using his power in some way. And so as I was watching this happen, and women were telling all of these stories of every time something happened to them, from the very, very big criminal offenses, things you can be charged for as a crime in terms of male violence against women, to the everyday, relatively sexual behaviors that kind of govern women. And that's where I wanted to focus, because it is, if we allow the little things to continue without unchecked, without saying it's inappropriate to yell at a woman in the street, it's you shouldn't make that joke, or you shouldn't talk about Mary's skirt length. If we, all of that stuff creates a culture of permissibility that allows for the escalation of behaviors into ones that put women's bodies at risk. And for me, that is any behavior that treats a woman or any person as a sexualized object without agency. So what we are not saying is you can't talk to women or you can't tell them that they look nice. What we are saying is treat them as a human being, not as an object. And my dear personal internet friend, we're not friends in real life, but I wish we were, Caroline Crado Perez talks about this in her book, Invisible Women, which is a lot about the default male in society. And she talks about these sexual behaviors that are not criminal, technically. Before we even get to the more serious offenses like being assaulted, women are dealing on a daily basis with behaviors from men that make and are often calculated to make them feel uncomfortable, ranging from catcalling to being leered at, to the use of sexualized slurs and requests for someone's name. None of these behaviors is criminal exactly, but they all add up to the feeling of sexual menace, a feeling of being watched, of being in danger. And in fact, these behaviors can easily escalate. Enough women have experienced the sharp shift from smile love, it might never happen, to fuck you bitch, why are you ignoring me, to being followed home and assaulted, to know that an innocent comment from a male stranger can be anything but. Mm-hmm. And she goes into a lot of statistics about specifically women in public spaces and women on public transport, and the way that their bodies are treated and their agency is not considered. So this culture of permissibility starts with this passive voice where we have removed the perpetrators from the sentence. It continues in the way we talk about it and the questions that we ask about these incidents when they happen. And the fact that we victim blame all the time, which is what we do when we say, why, the number of times I saw people saying online, and specifically men, well, why didn't she take a taxi home if she was walking home alone? Because women don't get abducted and assaulted in taxis, ever. Oh, wait, raise your hand if you've been assaulted, even verbally in a taxi. Yeah. So going back to Dr. Kristen's point that there is no safe space and there's no rule book we can follow in which we are not assaulted verbally.
Also, I'll say too, like I was in a bar with my husband. My husband was right next to me and I was assaulted at the other side of my body.
Yeah. So there's
right there, ring on my finger, whole nine.
There's no safe space.
There's no safe space.
There's no safe space. So we encourage you, if you're watching this, to think about the phrase that we use as social scientists is internalized misogyny, which was even the example from the start of this video when I talked about the fact that I had never considered how the phrase violence against women was part of that internalized misogyny. So even, you know, stark raving feminists that we are can learn lessons and can be
it's a hell of a drug, man. Like we've been we've been seeping in it for so long. You have to constantly unlearn it, as the same with any of the soups that we swim in.
Yep.
We have to unlearn whiteness. We have to unlearn, we have to unlearn misogyny. We have to unlearn ableism. We have to unlearn all the stuff, all of our privileges, all
our colonialist mentality.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Like all of it. Yeah. And so think about what behaviors and thought processes you have learned. Think about cognitively how you are framed by your society and culture wherever you are, to think about women and to think about men and male violence against women, and start working on unlearning it. It's hard work, but literally lives are at stake. So
really,
I think we can do the work, and hopefully, it's hard not to feel discouraged about what has happened with Sarah Everard, both to her body and to her family and in the popular culture. But maybe this time it'll make a difference.
The greatest way that we can make change is to honor legacies appropriately, I think, when it comes to someone's death. And if she made all of those concessions, then Sarah knew exactly what kind of world that we lived in. And she knew exactly the calculated risks she took, because everyday life as a woman in the West is a series of calculated risks. Mm-hmm. This is heavy to us because it's heavy. And we usually get a lot rantier with this kind of stuff. If you tuned in for us yelling about things, I can direct you to a couple Bridgerton videos. But I'm just grieved. I'll be really honest. When I got the news alert about Sarah, my immediate thought was, jeez, again. And I know I read more crime blotter reports than a lot of people. And I talk to more people who are survivors of assault than some other people do. And I know that what we know about is like 1/100th of what actually happens out there. But this was the worst case scenario to a lot of women.
Yeah.
And it happened.
And it happens at an alarming rate. I think one of the things that happened this week that was so exhausting and disheartening was that as we were in the process of trying to locate Sarah's remains, the UN released a report on women in the UK in which 97% of them said that they were sexually assaulted. 1 in 3 women, three women have been murdered since Sarah Everard's body was discovered in the UK.
That's 6 days, by the way.
It happens at an alarmingly high rate. Not just the low-level sexualized behaviors, the catcalls, the gropes, the inappropriate comments. All of it happens at an alarming rate. And so, yeah, I think we're both just saddened and exhausted by it.
So tired. I'm so tired. And of course, International Women's Day is always a double-edged sword to me, because it feels like an opportunity for performative feminism and not performative equity and not like actual equity. And then in the UK, it was bookended. The first day of the week was International Women's Day, and then it's concluded on Mother's Day, which is another performative day that is very difficult for me for a whole host of reasons. Not because my mother is not a saint on earth, but I struggle. And so watching all of this kind of mess, it's like a perfect summary of what it feels like to be a woman on the planet a lot. Yeah. And I say this knowing my incredible privilege of having a whole lot in the scheme of women.
Yeah.
Have a ton of agency.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just heavy to carry. And what we hope this video has done is hopefully introduce you to a couple new ideas and maybe frames of thought. We see it as our calling in life to poke at society until different truths fall out. And we will continue to watch and hold space for those grieving for Sarah, that they achieve some level of justice and that potentially brings them some sort of closure. But grief is a wild animal.
That is our hot-ish take. on this, you know, exceptionally important topic. We don't know what our next hot-ish take will be, but we hope we will see you then for whatever it is. And if not, we'll see you hopefully back on our YouTube channel for another video sometime soon.
Bye, everybody.